The Roman army of the late Republic refers to the armed forces deployed by the late Roman Republic from the beginning of the 1st century BC, until the establishment of the Imperial Roman army by Augustus in 30 BC. Shaped by major social, political, and economic change, the late Republic saw the transition from the Roman army of the Mid-Republic, which was a temporary levy based solely on the conscription of Roman citizens, to the Imperial Roman army of the Principate, which was a standing, professional army based on the recruitment of volunteers. Continuous expansion, wars, conflicts, and the acquisition of a growing overseas territory led to an increasing degree of professionalism within the army. There was a significant intertwining of military and politics in the acquisition and maintenance of power. After the Social War, and following the establishment of the First Triumvirate by Julius Caesar, Licinius Crassus, and Pompeius Magnus, there grew an emphasis on the expansion of a united republic toward regions such as Britain and Parthia. The effort to quell the invasions and revolts of non-Romans persisted throughout the period, from Marius' battles with the wandering Germans in Italy to Caesar's campaign in Gaul. After the completion of the Social War in 88 BC, Roman citizenship was granted to all its Italian allies south of the Po River. The alii were abolished, and the socii were from now on recruited directly into uniformly organized and equipped legions. The non-Italian allies that had long fought for Rome continued to serve alongside the legions but remained irregular units under their own leaders. For reasons that remain uncertain to this day, the structure of the Roman army changed dramatically during the late Republic. The maniple, which had been the standard unit throughout the Mid-Republic, was replaced by the cohort as the new standard tactical unit of the legions, while the Roman citizen cavalry and light infantry disappeared from the battlefield. Traditionally, many of these changes have been attributed to the reforms of Gaius Marius, but some scholars argue that they may have happened far more gradually. Conflicts and expansion. During the late Republic, Rome was in a state of almost continuous warfare and civil war. Ambitious commanders, driven by a desire to distinguish themselves from their contemporaries, led massive campaigns to expand the empire's borders far beyond the region of Italy. In the most intensive period of conquest in Rome's history, Rome dramatically increased in size by adding large territories in Gaul, North Africa, Asia Minor, Cyprus, Crete, and the Levant to its territory. The frequency of war, the prolonged duration of the campaigns, and the growing demand for garrisons resulted in the legions to develop a much more permanent and professional character. As the length of military service increased, the legionaries began to view the army not just as an interruption of normal life, but as a career in itself. Campaign history. Military and politics. Jugurthina War. After receiving permission from the plebeian assembly to command the army in 107 BC, Gaius Marius marched through Numidia to take the town of Capsae, whose entire population was either killed or sold into slavery. This action was later criticized as against the law of war by Roman historian Sallust. Marius then swiftly assured victory after marching 600 miles to capture the Jugurthina royal treasury. The campaign displayed the effectiveness of the proletarian army in battle. Conflict with wandering Germanic tribes. In 105 BC, two Roman forces were defeated by the Cimbrian Teutones in the Battle of Ariceo. These forces were led by Servilius Caepio of a firmly ingrained Roman heritage and Malleus Maximus from a newer, aspiring family. The defeat is credited to a lack of coordination due to strife between them, as Caepio refused to work alongside someone not of noble blood. The constant fear of Germanic invasion allowed the populist faction a foothold to have Gaius Marius re-elected in 104, 103, and 102 BC. Marius showcased his army's capability once again, first massacring 90,000 of the 100,000 Teutonese soldiers, which included women and children, implementing a well-coordinated rear ambush tactic. He subsequently overpowered the Cimbriate virtually in what is now Vercelli, Italy. Since proletarians had no land to return to, Marius, now beginning his sixth consulship, joined his men in the Forum to battle the Senate, who refused to provide them with land. This exemplifies the growing trend of applying military force to obtain a political resolution. Social war. The social war opened in 90 BC, when Italians began to revolt because the Senate would not grant them Roman citizenship even though they showed loyalty in fighting for Rome in the past. The revolt was headed by the Marsian Samnites, who established a capital, Senate, and two commanders at Corfinum, which was renamed Italia. Some Italians remained on Rome's side, including the Etruscans, Umbrians, Campanians, Greeks, and Latins. The Roman force consisted of 150,000 men against 100,000, but the rebellion was extinguished when, in 89 BC, Rome presented a citizenship offer to all Italians that surrendered. Civil wars. At the completion of the social war in 89 BC, Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix marched on Rome with 6 legions, who devoted their loyalty solely to him. As a means of coercing the plebeian assembly to grant him authority to fight King Mithridates of Pontus, who invaded the Roman province of Asia. This sparked factional fighting and the murders of important Romans such as Quintus Pompeius Rufus. Lucius Cornelius Cinna and Gaius Marius teamed up to use their armies to sack and loot Rome and declared themselves co-consuls after starving it out. It would be Marius' seventh and final term. In 83 BCE, following his capture of Athens from Mithridates, Sulla returned to Rome, joined his army of 35,000 veterans with 3 legions raised by the young Pompey the Great to defeat a lone consul's 100,000 newly recruited. The first triumvirate in 60 BC consisted of Pompey, Licinius Crassus, and Julius Caesar. The latter was granted command in Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and Narbonese Gaul as a result of some recent successes, commanding at a victorious siege of Mytilene in 80 BC, to receive a civic crown, defeating pirates in naval warfare, commanding in the Pontic War of 74, and subduing Spanish tribes in 61. Caesar called upon his forces to threaten the Senate into providing land for Pompey's veterans. Annexations achieved by Caesar include lands of many Gallic tribes such as the Aedui, Belgic tribes like the Nervii, and Germanic tribes including the Usipetes and Tencteri. Even though he characteristically drove his men to their limits in these battles, those legions would grow intensely loyal to him, which would become very important in the near future. As Caesar's legal command, Provincia, over his 13 legions was running out, he famously crossed the Rubicon River with just 1 legion, purportedly stating, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. He defeated the larger Pompeian armies through the experience of his men and clever use of strategy, even employing the pilum as a bayonet to combat Pompey's 7-to-1 cavalry advantage. Caesar's assassination led to the creation of the second triumvirate of Octavian, Mark Antony, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus in 43 BC, exemplifying the mobility of loyalty in the army of this period. Octavian was able to raise legions without legal command as a result of his Caesarian connection, 2 of which were defected from Antony. The triumvirate was short-lived, and inner strife led to further civil war. Thanks to the military prowess of his general Agrippa, Octavian was able to gain control of the West's entire army of 45 legions and navy of 500 to 600 ships. Even though the Roman military power concentrated on heavy infantry, the importance of naval warfare was displayed in the final Battle of Actium, where Octavian achieved total victory. He then acted to consolidate the military in preparation to transition the Roman government to the Principate. Background: the Polybian army The organization of the army of the mid-Republic was described by the Greek historian Polybius in the mid-2nd century BC. The basic military unit of the Polybian army was the maniple, which numbered about 120 men, and was subdivided into 2 centuries of 60 men. The standard legion contained 30 maniples organized into 3 distinct lines, and consisted of about 4,200 infantrymen and 300 Roman citizen cavalrymen. The actual size of the legions, however, often depended on the particular situation, and sources mention that in times of need legions could number between 5,000 and 6,000 men. Based on their property and age, the infantrymen were divided into 4 specific groups, and were organized and equipped according to that particular group. The first group, which formed the first line of the Polybian legion, was that of the hastata. These men were recruited from the younger men eligible for service and were probably in their late teens or early 20s. The second line was formed by the principes, who were drawn from men in their later 20s or early 30s, and the last line was made up by the triarii, who were the oldest and most experienced men in the army. While there were normally 1,200 hastati and 1,200 principes in every legion, the triarii numbered just 600. The poorest and youngest of the citizens fought in the legions as light infantry, of which there were usually 1,200 in each legion. Beside the troops levied from the eligible Roman population, served the troops provided by Rome's allies. These troops, primarily recruited from Rome's allies on the Italian peninsula, were organized in so-called ali or wing. Marian reforms. The Marian reforms, executed by Gaius Marius, marked a transitional phase in the army of the Roman Republic. The election of consul Gaius Marius occurred during the Jugurthine War between the king of Numidia and the Roman Republic. Following the election, the Senate did not authorize him to command the army in Numidia due to their disapproval of his slandering his opponent, Quintus Caius Aelius Metellus Numidicus, in securing his consulship. The plebeian assembly then passed a specific law that granted Marius this authority. The Senate retaliated by dramatically cutting the number of soldiers he was provided with. In order to raise a sufficient army, Marius invited, for the first time, proletarians, poorer men that did not hold much property, to volunteer to join the army with the offer of a regular salary. The resulting army was not as professional due to their lack of experience. Marius resolved to hiring gladiators to train his new recruits. Marius had to provide equipment to his new legionaries instead of them bringing their own as was the norm. This was because the proletarians were too poor to purchase the necessary weapons and armor with their own money. The equipment became more standardized as a result. The use of a fur car by soldiers was established by Marius. The fur car is a stick with a forked end that allowed the soldier to more easily carry around his equipment. Within a pack tied at the end of the fur car, the soldier would most likely carry his sagum, a cloak that acted as a blanket, a kettle or pot, replacement straps, shaving items, and rations. Once packed, the fur car was slung over the shield and fastened to their back, inspiring the nickname Marius mules. The result of implementing this method of individually carrying weight allowed Marius to reduce the amount of wagons, animals, and slaves that must be brought on army trains. The standard weapons carried by soldiers were also modified by Marius. The iron head of the pilum, a javelin, was traditionally riveted to the shaft with iron bolts for strength. This was changed to wooden pegs with the intention of breaking it upon impact so as to prevent the reuse of the weapon by the enemy. He also provided each soldier with a dagger, or pugio. Marius removed the legionary light infantry and the legionary cavalry altogether from the Roman army. He then incorporated foreign units provided by allies into the ranks. These included Balearic slingers, Numidian light cavalry, and Cretan archers. These units were called upon as needed to replace those that were eliminated from the Roman army. Marius introduced a unique soldier-hard ideology to the Roman legion, which promoted the personal toughness displayed by each soldier and one's ability to endure being pressed nearly to his limits. This ideology acted as a model for future generals. Another change that lasted for centuries was the replacement of the 5 standards of the legion to one standard, a silver eagle. As a result of his reforms, Marius was able to display the full capability of the new Roman army of the late Republic. In doing so, he significantly increased the effectiveness and diversity of the army's individuals as well as the mobility of the army as a whole, both on and off the battlefield.